Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 17. Today on the podcast, we have the amazing Sadie Stellick from the farm at Camp Glenbrook to talk about, well, running a no-till garden on a summer camp and the challenges that come along with that, as well as how she keeps track of her sales that are connected to the cafeteria. And Sadie installed SolarApp this past year on a greenhouse. And I was really interested in hearing about how that experience went, so we talk about that. It's a great conversation, a unique farm setup, and a lot of fun all around. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. For 28 years, Growing for Market has been the source for direct market food and flower growers. All GFM content is custom written for the magazine by farmers, like myself, and others who get their hands dirty and know what they're talking about. It's all original content. If you do farmers market, CSA, farm stand, pick your own, florist sales, or wholesaling, your business is different from any other kind of farming. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to GFM for all the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of small farming 10 times a year. Available as a paper magazine, digital download, or both, subscribe to GFM for the latest on market farming. There's information on growing vegetables and flowers in every magazine. Use the coupon code NOTIL, that's lowercase, one word, to get 20% off any subscription through growingformarket.com or call 800-307-8949. Subscribers always get 20% off the carefully curated selection of market farming books GFM carries. In fact, GFM editor and podcast guest Andrew Mefford's brand new book, The Organic No-Till Farming Revolution, is available for 20% off for the first month in February from growingformarket.com. Interviews with 17 different growers using no-till and an overview of the techniques provide a roadmap for anyone interested in starting a no-till farm or converting an existing one to no or less tillage. That's growingformarket.com, promo code lowercase no-till. All right, enough from me. Let's get to the interview with Sadie Stellick of the farm at Camp Glenbrook. Sadie Stellick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I was thinking maybe first you could give us a little bit of a rundown of what Glenbrook is and what you do there.
Yeah, so Camp Glenbrook it's an educational farm. It's a year-round educational facility, I guess is what I'd say. And one of the most important parts of it is that it has a farm-to-table dining program. That's pretty legitimate. So we've got about an acre and a half of veggie cultivation plus a half an acre of fruit, and then we have all grass-fed cattle, sort of forest-raised pigs, I guess you could say, and then we have laying hens and meat birds, and then a maple production as well. And we raise about 56% of the food that people eat who come to Glenbrook.
And when you're referring to people, you're talking about the camp goers, the campers, yeah?
Yeah, so in the summer we have summer campers, but then we're year-round, so we have classes come to visit all year. We also have some adult programming and some family programming, so we're actually pretty busy really March through November.
And you said that you're doing about 56%? Is that what the number you gave us?
Yeah, and that's food dollars is how I basically weigh every single thing that comes from the farm, every leaf of kale, every single egg, and then I sort of figure out the wholesale market value, and then I compare it to how much the chef has spent, and that's how I figure out sort of here's what you would have had to spend if you were going to buy this wholesale from other, organic farms, basically.
Right. And then are you selling any excess produce anywhere else?
We're not selling a whole lot of excess produce. Occasionally I'll sell stuff to people, but, most of it just gets eaten here, which is great.
Right. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this camp works. It's sort of a Waldorf camp, is that correct?
It is, yeah. We are actually owned by a Waldorf school down in New York City. They're the people who send up a lot of their kids during the school year. So I guess we're not a Waldorf school per se, but we're definitely Waldorf inspired. So, we teach using your hands. We're media free, which is becoming more and more rare. And we do a lot with art and music, and yeah, I guess that's sort of how the Waldorf is connected.
Sure, and then are the kids kind of integrated into the garden? How does that work?
Yeah, definitely. So the kids come, I think the youngest group we usually get are in third grade, all the way up through. We have a gap year program as well. So that's, graduated high school students who are taking a break before college sometimes. And yeah, they've been as integrated as like they come up for a couple hours and work with me, or, I've had basically like interns who spend several weeks with me. Sort of, I teach them how to seed, I teach them how to transplant, I teach them how to harvest, and that's kind of how they're integrated. But yeah, they do a lot of work with me.
I'm so curious about how the camp and the farm are sort of integrated. So when you say the kids are sort of working, is it a situation where they're coming, harvesting their food, taking that to the kitchen, or is it kind of they do a little cultivation, you kind of do a garden lesson? Like, how does that, when it's actually going on, what does that look like?
It really depends on their age, and often where they're coming from, and also kind of what season we're in with the garden. If peas need to be picked, I'm like, oh, that's a great project for, sixth graders or whatever. Like I trust them up there. It's something that needs to be done. It's something that we can hopefully make fun. My goal is never to make them feel like farming is bad. I want them to feel inspired while they're up there as part of my plan. So I try never to do just total drudgery work, which, as we all know, happens even if we try to avoid it in the garden. But yeah, I try to make it inspiring for them.
Yeah, that's super cool. It looks like the kind of camp that I both want to go to and send my kid to.
I know, right? I was lucky enough to have my middle school owned a farm. I grew up in Minneapolis, so I was an urban kid, but my middle school owned a farm that was about an hour away, and that's how I got connected to agriculture and just oh wow, people work with their hands for a living. That's really great, and get to be outside. And so I feel really good that at least that these kids get exposure, because if you don't get exposure, then how do you know whether or not you're ever, what you're missing, basically.
Yeah, sure. So tell us a little bit more about that story. What is your sort of farming background?
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in Minneapolis. No one in my family has farmed for several generations. And I spent a lot of time going to the farm that my middle school owned, and I even spent, a month there when I was in high school, and just because I was feeling really connected to the farm. And then during college, I basically worked on farms during the summers, but also felt sort of torn because I grew up in a family where people didn't really do a lot of, everyone was a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, and those are all really great things, but it wasn't, none of those things were really inspiring me. So every summer I was, working on farms and interning, and then I went, I went to Hampshire College, where they were open to me basically going farming in Ireland for 6 months and writing about it as a part of my, that was my semester abroad program, basically.
Oh, neat. So your background is in journalism then? Was that what you were going to school for?
I got a bachelor's in creative writing. Yeah. So
you and so many other farmers. That's
every time someone says, "Wow, that was really something," I say, "Thanks. I paid a lot of money for that." It's so funny. So anyways, it was great though, because I think at that point I knew that I needed something different than reading the things I was reading and doing some of the things I was doing in school. So it was a good break for me to go and sort of try to explore my roots, because my family's mostly from Ireland, so it was a great way to explore that farming culture and do some writing and just keep moving ever closer to making farming my life's path.
Yeah, what was that? I mean, what did you see when you were over there in terms of kind of interesting agriculture?
Yeah, Ireland's got just a really interesting story where it's many hundreds of years ago it was completely forested and had a lot of really different kinds of agriculture, and now it's like there are no trees and it's gotten kind of overgrazed. So it was good to kind of see. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of really wonderful agriculture, but I feel like a lot of what I saw was kind of like agriculture that your examples where you're like, that is hurting the land a little bit, with some of those grazing practices. So those were just good things for me to see, and to realize that America has a pretty awesome farming scene. Like, you don't have to go to Europe to find pretty like down to earth and real food culture.
I know that we had a guest on here from Ireland, Stephen Sennett, I think several episodes ago, but he talked about some of the difficulties of having. There weren't a lot of people that were farming sort of no-till gardening around where he is.
For sure. Yeah, I think one thing I did was I have always loved community and living in community, so I chose a lot of farms that are part of communities too. So I think that might have been helpful, because I got to see a lot of small farms in action, small family farms and communities. So I think I maybe didn't see so much of that sort of bad produce methods. I just saw like a lot of undesirable grazing, I guess.
Sure. So then how did you come to find Glenbrook?
Yeah, so I spent before I found Glenbrook 4 years ago, I spent some years learning how to do wood fire bread baking. So I was working doing that, and also part-time trying to run a farm with a friend of mine. So that started to feel pretty unmanageable when some days I would realize that I had been on my feet. I would get in bed at like 10 at night and realize I've been on my feet since 3 in the morning. And literally like on my feet, like eating lunch, standing up while I do so I can finish baking and then run to try to work on the farm. And so I realized I had to make a choice. And I told my boss, who was also a good friend of mine, that I was hoping to be farming full time. And everyone said, "Oh, you should check out this job at Glenbrook. It looks really great." And I read the job description and I said, "No one can do that job. That job." So they want someone to like hang the moon, because it's someone who needs to be experienced with all these different animals and all these and this wonderful garden and run this sugaring operation. And so I actually didn't apply when I first saw it, and then a couple months went by and I said, "What the heck? Maybe I'll just apply." And I felt underqualified, which is interesting. I don't know. But it was a big step forward for me, I realized that what I wanted was like one more farm to work on where I could be working for someone who could really mentor me. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I was like, I just need one more like really strong mentor experience, maybe that would last a couple years, and then step up to something like working at Glenbrook. But I had to just skip that step and just, I tried to make a lot of relationships with other local farmers just to have some people to talk to about what I was doing. And I think that helped a lot. But, there's still a point where you just kind of like have to jump in and give it a shot and see how it goes, basically.
So then when you came onto the farm, what did it look like, and then what were your first impressions?
Yeah, so the man who ran the farm before me, he got really great infrastructure set up. So there was like a big hoop house, unheated, and then like a little greenhouse for seedlings, and it's interesting because we're part of a larger organization. There's obviously a lot here, but the land itself was, I would say, recovering a lot. The man who'd been doing our hay operation, it was very conventional, So, and he hadn't been. He was older. He just retired last year, which is why I'm able to talk this way. He hadn't taken soil tests. He'd just been throwing down a bunch of conventional fertilizer every year and then just cutting all the hay back and getting as many cuts as he could. And our garden our garden is in I think its 6th year that it's been open. And before that, it was on that conventional hay land, So it just, it needed, I think it needed a lot of TLC. Yeah, basically. So
okay.
So I took soil tests of the whole place and just saw the work ahead, and people kept saying like it's not gonna get better overnight, and so that year we did I think we did $8,000 worth of produce, and these are wholesale prices, so it's like it would be a lot better if I was taking to the farmer's market or having a CSA, but that's neither here nor there. And this year I think we did $50,000 from the garden.
That's great. And then, so is your salary coming out of what you produce then, or are they paying you a separate salary, and that's kind of, how does that work?
Yeah, so my salary is just my salary, which is nice. And then, initially when I got hired, there was talk about like, once you break even, you can have some of this money, but it's interesting because I'm basically sort of like charging the kitchen. I'm doing air quotes because I'm charging the kitchen wholesale prices. And the methods we use are, because we don't use hardly any equipment, or machinery whatsoever, and so it's like I don't know. We can't. And we're so small, we can't really compete with like the farm that we order a lot of produce from is one of the biggest farms in Vermont. So I let go of the idea of sort of making a ton of money with this farm, and this past year that we just finished was the first year that we've sort of been in the black. So I feel good about that. Even though we have these wholesale prices, and I'm paying we have staff, so I'm paying my staff decent sort of living wages. So that's kind of how that goes.
Nice. So what kind of staff do you have? Do you have several people who work full-time in the garden?
Yeah, so basically I guess I'll talk about this year, because every year has been different. In the past, it was just the farm director, that's me, and then an assistant who would be there for, 7 or 9 months, basically. This year, so let's see, like, how do I explain this? When I got here, the sugaring operation was taking a lot of people's energy and time, and, basically the farm director and the assistant were having to work really full time starting in February. And what I kind of feel like is, you've got plants, you've got animals, you've got maple. Pick two is kind of how I felt. Like, I want to start my farming season really, really hard in March, and then work really hard through November. But I don't think I can tack on that extra outdoor work in January and February. So, anyways, this year I wanted to put more effort into the produce and the animals, and focus on those two things and really make them strong. And so yeah, I've got 3 staff coming in May, which is really great. And they all happen to be women this year, not through my seeking only women, but it seems to be who tends to apply.
Yeah, that's interesting. We get maybe I would say 70% of the people who contact us about work are women. I think it's really cool to see how many women are interested in farming and seeing that it's totally wide open for everybody to join in.
I know. I think the tide is turning. I was talking to one of the women who was applying recently. Was saying like, it's funny. She's 20 and she's like, I just feel like I'm getting to this life so late. I was like, you don't have to worry. Like, I think that the organic farming community is really open to newcomers these days, I think. As opposed to, who knows, 50 years ago, people would be like, you didn't grow up on a farm, you must not know how to farm. And I just think that it's open. It's a lot more open now to people of all backgrounds, and I think it's really nice that women are starting to feel like I can work as hard or as strong as anyone else,
Oh yeah, absolutely. My wife basically does everything I do, but she does it with a baby on her hip. So it's like, it's it's great. It's such an amazing thing to see. To see, like you were saying, that point about people being just generally more inviting of new farmers. I think that's true. And living in the countryside, where we were living in Monroe County, down in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky, our neighbors were so amazing and they were so welcoming to us, because I think a lot of them have sort of seen the countryside kind of disappearing, like especially the population.
Yeah, it doesn't really serve anyone to be exclusive these days in agriculture, because I don't have the numbers obviously, but something like 90% of the country used to be farmers, and now it's like 1% or less maybe. It's not a good situation. I think we need more people to be directly connected to their food and growing, and yeah, everyone should be welcome to join.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you do your gardening. How you set up beds and sort of what your no-till system looks like.
Yeah, so my first year here, we had someone till, which is interesting because it was such a big garden. So basically, yeah, my first year here, we had someone till for us, and then I set up all the beds the way I wanted them to be, the way they are forever. And I got it all measured, and we dug them out and got them all beautiful, and that's basically what we've been working with since, which I think was nice to get that first sort of start. And now I feel like we're in a really good place, and I've seen the beds just get healthier and healthier and even more productive, and it's really awesome. And I have all those numbers too I can share with you at some point, just like output per foot, or whatever for each crop. It's grown a lot, and I'm sure it's because the quality of the soil is so much better. Let's see, what were you saying? You were asking about.
Yeah, well, actually, maybe tell us a little bit about, are you on 30-inch beds and 18-inch pathways? Like, what does the bed setup look like?
You said, so I would say that they're a little bit wider than 30 inches, maybe 30, somewhere between 30 and 36. Yeah, so the pathways are about a foot. But, I would say that the slope starts up. It doesn't feel like a foot when you're kneeling in it. You know what I mean? It feels a little bit smaller. I think maybe that, there's basically what I do is I 4 feet is what I'm doing, and then a foot of that I'm throwing back in the bed. And that's my walking row. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then maybe describe a little bit about how you manage those beds.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we've noticed there's 2 things that we've noticed for how to really keep those beds manageable, because obviously the hardest part about no-till is that once the weeds take over, if you're really committed to no-till, it's really quite a lot of effort to get them back to where you want them. Okay, so there's 3 things, I guess. First thing being that we any weed seeds that we cannot let go to seed, that's really big for us, just because we were starting with grass seed that had been let go to seed every year for I don't know how long. I think that guy had been hanging for 40 or 50 years in that space. So it was a monumental effort to get those beds to be like more weed free. But the good thing is they're mostly annual weeds. There weren't a lot of perennial weeds because of that, I think. So that's number one. No weed seeds if possible. The other thing I do is, so every year I map out what I'm doing, and the beds that I know I'm going to need to get into first, I'll usually just try to work those up first, but the beds I think I'm going to need to get into second, sort of like the second wave, I'll try to cover those with landscaping fabric. You know what I mean? If I think they're going to be a problem, I'll cover those things with landscaping fabric just to sort of protect them until I get to them,
Okay.
Oh, cover crop. I cover everything, not just, some with mulch, with just a nice thick layer of mulch, which is great. But I've experimented with a bunch of different cover crops, which obviously with our methods, like, I'm not going to put anything that wants to be turned in, at least not like mechanically turned in. Like, so I've been favoring stuff that tends to winter kill and then make like a nice green mat on the bed. So like, I love peas if you can get them started early enough. I love oats, except for that if you start them too early, I feel like they make these really pretty intense like fibrous clumps that you have to deal with. So that's those. I love clover, except for it's really expensive. I love clover. We tried rapeseed last year, which I also liked. I thought that grew really fast. We tried forage turnips. That also grew really great and excluded weeds. My animals didn't like it. I thought they might, but they didn't like it, even though they're called forage turnips.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm like pretty religious about covering my beds, like every single inch of my beds before winter.
Okay, so when you were talking about landscape fabric, you also mentioned that you work up some of the beds that you're not throwing landscape fabric over. What does that look like? Are you just going in with a scuffle hoe and just kind of breaking it up a little bit, or what's...
Yep, I don't find that I'm having to do any, like, I think the beds have gotten pretty friable. Like, I don't find that I'm having to, like, really dig much, depending on what's been in there and how they've been treated. It's funny how, an acre and a half, you can tell it's not like the whole thing feels the same, even though it's all in one area. Like, everything needs a little bit of different treatment based on how it's been and what's been in it and that kind of thing. So yeah, that I'm not finding that I need to do a ton of digging in them now, unless there's been like super clumpy stuff in there that I know is going to be hard to cultivate around,
Sure, and then are you doing I guess up there you have kind of a shorter season, but are you doing multiple crops in beds, or are you just kind of using single crop and then putting it under cover crop, or how's that work?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of double planting. I sometimes feel like the quality of the second crop suffers a little. So, I'll do it occasionally with something that I know is going to be finished in late June or early July. Yeah, I could do another short season thing in there. But yeah, our season is small enough that there are some things I know that they're going to take the whole bed up the whole season,
Sure.
Yeah, but I basically have a huge spreadsheet that calculates a ton of stuff for me, and so I can look through it and say, okay, when do I think these things are going to be harvested? Do I think I can fit something else in there? Yeah, and it's amazing how productive. I also haven't found that I need to do a bunch of double planting because the garden is just so productive that sometimes it's more than we can handle at times.
Right.
I don't really. Yes, I could fit 300 bed feet of spinach in here, but like, do I really think that I'm gonna have anyone to give that spinach to? I guess, yeah. Or the time. Like, we need to make sure I don't want to put a ton of stuff in the garden that I'm not sure I'll have the time to harvest. You know.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, when it comes down to it, an acre and a half is not a small amount of space.
No, it's actually amazing. You know, it's funny. Every now and then I say to people, "Oh, we're growing an acre and a half," and they look at me like, "Well, that's so small," which I totally hear you if you're coming from a farm that's 15, 100, 1,000 acres or whatever. But like an acre and a half is actually, you know, we've produced like, I don't know, 100,000 pounds of produce or something last year. It doesn't feel like a small amount, you know.
Yeah, sure. Especially when you don't have a tractor or you're not riding a tractor from one side to the other.
I know, like a bed former. I told one of my employees last year, like, oh yeah, there's this implement that makes a bed for you, and they looked at me like, why don't we have one? You know, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I even told you. But you know, the other funny thing about, well, there's a couple funny things about those kinds of practices that when I first got here you know, we did the test with the soil where you stick the thing in and see where you hit the hard pan, and because of the tillage that had been done, the hard pan was pretty high. And so I really feel like it was doing us a disservice to do that work. You know, we weren't getting those like right angle carrots or whatever, but pretty close. You know, so that kind of thing is. Oh, and also the other thing is we're in New Hampshire, and like we're rock farming a little up here. It's the Granite State, and like I remember when the guy did that tilling that one time, he had to stop like every half hour to try to dig out a boulder, you know. So we really can't be our soil is too rocky even for that kind of for a lot of implements. So it's okay. It's I'm not I chose to go no-till because I knew it was the right thing, and also it works for what we're working with too, you know.
Yeah, sure. So what was your kind of introduction to no-till? What were some of your early inspirations for that? Because it seems, you know, especially at that time period, there, you know, in 2015, 2016, there weren't a lot of people, at least not visibly doing it. So how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so the place I was working at before, when I was trying to be a baker and a farmer at the same time, it was basically established on this pretty old, well, I guess probably not pretty old, but this family farm from the 70s, where they had been doing no-till as well, for a really long time. So, and they'd been like, you know, in the 70s and 80s, they were a horse-powered CSA, just like very cool place. And some of my mentors there, one of them was very into permaculture and just taught me a lot about how healthy it is for the soil not to be doing a lot of tillage. And I got to grow in those places and see what that was like. And after that, I was convinced that despite the intense input of work that it took, that it was worth it. But that it would take a few years, doing what we're doing in particular, to get the land easier to work with, you know, that it just takes time.
Sure. Can you say what the name of that farm was?
Yeah, it's called Orchard Hill Farm and Community.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds cool. That's fun.
Hey, you all, just going to jump in here real quick and say that if you are enjoying this podcast, make sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts and consider leaving a review on iTunes. That helps us reach more people. Also, make sure to sign up to be a patron at the Patreon page. That's Patreon, patreon.com/FarmerJesse. We are over 1/3 of our way to our $1,000 per month goal, which we need to reach by May to have a second season of this podcast. So just keep that in mind. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. If you want an alternative option for supporting the show, you can donate to Venmo. That's Venmo. That's an app. to at No-Till Growers, ampersand No-Till Growers, or however you prefer. All right, thank you. Back to Sadie.
So you all are doing some 4-season growing, or is that kind of a new project you all are taking on?
Yes and no. This year I didn't because, as you saw, I was recovering my greenhouse. I would have liked to plant this year, but we didn't because I knew I was going to be standing in the beds to be putting on this new cover. So, but yeah, in the past I've done some like pretty hardy winter greens and triple covered them, and we've had some thing to eat in December. We've had some stuff to eat in, February and March. So would I say we're eating some things in the garden 12 months a year? Maybe not quite, but pretty close. And yeah, we're lucky to have the greenhouse for the season extension. And then the garden, we can, with the seasons being the way they are, which has been that I think lately we've had kind of late wet springs and then sort of long warm fall. I really have been able to get more out of the garden later in the fall than I expect. Like into December I've been harvesting kale and like not covered or anything, just like out there.
And then I want to hear a little bit about the reskinning that greenhouse, because you went to Solar Wrap. You didn't have Solar Wrap before, right? It was just regular plastic?
Right, it was just the regular like greenhouse skin, poly whatever. So I was like, okay, we really need to recover the greenhouse. I think it was in its 5th or 6th year, and just like the plants were really starting to show it, and I'd been hoping that we could. I know that they say 4 years you're supposed to change it out, but it's a lot of work and it's so expensive. And I hate the trash of it. You're just like, oh my God, I love organic farming. And then there's times where you're like, oh, we're making a lot of trash, depending on if you're using black plastic. It's like you just have to balance how that feels. So I started looking and just thinking about basically costing out the fact that Solar Wrap doesn't need to be replaced for UV degradation ever. Which is hard to believe, but whereas the other stuff, the plants start to get leggy and the light's not really getting through and it's getting cloudy, and then you have to replace it every 4 years, and that's very costly and it takes a lot of time. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just put this stuff on that you never have to replace. And I'm really curious to see how it goes when I run it this spring with the seedlings, but supposedly it holds in way more heat too. And I was having a lot of problems with the inflation on this greenhouse. Just like having to try to install these like jump blowers because like the other one half was inflating and the other half wasn't, and then they were like sticking together with ice and I couldn't get them to inflate. So with Solar Wrap, it is basically 2 layers, so you don't have to inflate, and then that's no energy. And so through all these things, I basically convinced myself that I could pay the 10 times the cost or whatever it was, to put this stuff on.
Yeah, it's super cool. So it looks a little bit like bubble wrap, but you put it on, unlike a large skin like a regular plastic, you have to put it on in sheets. So how did that work, and how did that go for you all?
Yeah, so basically you install these, they call them extrusion tracks, up on the bows of your greenhouse. And that was the big thing, is you install these tracks on every single, layer of your bows. You have to have these tracks. Basically from the hip wall to hip wall is the tracks. I guess, is it called a knee wall? Knee wall?
Oh, the hip board? Yeah.
Yeah, hip board. Okay, I was like, for me it's at my hip. I don't know, maybe for a tall person it'd be at their knee. Anyways, you install all these extrusion tracks, and then ideally you should be able to run these pieces, up and over the greenhouse. However, I will say one thing I did not know is that the technology is, so the guy said to me, like, look, this is a German technology, and there's not a lot of, like, wiggle room for error, and I didn't really realize what that meant until I started trying to put it on my greenhouse that was not designed to be perfectly 4-foot bows. So, yeah, and of course I left this till November when I was like, now I have time to recover my greenhouse, and it was like getting colder, and it was like it's starting to snow, and so I would say that if anyone is interested in it, you really have to make sure that your bows are evenly spaced, and I mean like even to the inch. It's not flexible. So I had to actually, I didn't have to move any of my bows, but I did have to move in one of my end walls.
Wow, so did you have to take the whole thing down and then move it?
No, I didn't. I basically undid the 3 pipes that hit the end wall, and I had to cut them, and then I had to push my whole end wall in. I had to, like, tilt it in, which, I was like, well, it wasn't going to fall down, but it's not a pretty thing. It looks fine now, but it was a lot of work. I'm really happy about how it went, but it was a lot of work because I had to basically loosen every single bow, which, the bows are connected like in 8 places to the greenhouse. So I had to loosen every single bow and then basically wiggle them and hit them with a rubber mallet to get the spacing where it needed to be so that the Solar Wrap could be pulled over.
Wow, that sounds crazy. And you said it's starting to snow, but if you look at the pictures, there is like legitimately snow on the ground.
Oh yeah, like there were a few points. There were several points where I had to stop because I like couldn't keep working on it because of the snow, and it was just like it was definitely a challenge to finish, and it was just really cold to be like up there with a drill and and like just doing that kind of work. So I would say if I were to do it, it's funny is the guy that sold to me said, are your things exactly 4 feet? And I said, yeah. Not really meaning that he meant like exactly 4 feet. I was like, yeah, they're like pretty close. And like if you're putting up a greenhouse, you're not going to be like putting the bows up to the to the 1/4 inch. Like, why would you? It's a farm. It doesn't need to be perfect. So, but for Solar Wrap, it does need to be perfect. So. Anyways, it took a lot of time, but I think I'm really excited to see how it runs this year. It's already, not knowing that I don't have to do that again in 4 years, I'm already feeling good. Oh, and it's recyclable, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. And it's also, Clara Coleman from Four Seasons Farm, she was telling me that she loves how it feels in their Solar Wrap greenhouse. Does it feel different to you when you walk inside of it?
Yeah, I think it has something to do with like that it actually lets in more light or like somehow amplifies the light. They basically have all these things about how it actually is better for your plants, like that there's like better diffusion. So yeah, I'm excited to see how it feels. I'm not measuring anything obviously, but just to like, well, actually I could measure the heat because it says that it can keep in 60 to 95% of the heat overnight, which for us is a lot, considering that when we start running our house in mid-March, it's, we could have nights that are 0.
Yeah, sure.
And it's really important for us not to be losing any of that heat,
Yeah. And that's quite a striking number, 60 to 90%.
No, 60 to 95. I know. I was like, even the 60 sounds amazing because with those other greenhouses, it was like 100% loss for me. Like overnight, if the heat went out or something, it'd be like it's all going out.
Oh yeah, it's the same temperature inside as out in the middle of the night. Yeah.
Like there's nothing. So that's why I just was having to double cover everything because. Which I would probably do anyways, just because it's good, but still, it's like, So we were, because this is the second year that I've had actual heat in my greenhouse. Like before, I was just kind of going on a wing and a prayer, like please don't die overnight, and just covering all my seedlings. But so this year, it's like I really, it's a lot of money, and it's obviously like carbon going out of the atmosphere to be using propane. So I really need it to stay in.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. That's all good. So, what about? I wanted to know, what are you doing for fertility in your gardens, in your greenhouse? And are you using a sort of composting program with the campers, with the camp?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I first got here, we just had a token amount of animals. We had 12 chickens, and oh, how great are 12 chickens, and now we have 200 chickens, and we've got these 8 cows, and the cows have produced quite a lot of manure. So yeah, when I got here, I was buying in compost. It was very expensive, and not nearly as good as the compost that now I'm getting from veggie scraps and garden waste and that kind of stuff, people's household compost, and all the amazing amount of manure and bedding and shavings and straw from the animals. And I'm finding that the balance is pretty good in the compost. Occasionally I'll have to talk to the gardeners and be like, we really need to be putting those broccoli stems in the compost because there's way too much chicken manure in the compost. I can just look at the balance and be like, oh no, we need more plant matter or whatever. So yeah, now we're basically using all of our own compost up in the garden, which I almost feel like you can never have too much compost, but I basically try to focus the lion's share of the compost on kind of my biggest feeders, so my long season plants, and then my big brassicas, my big solanaceae plants and stuff like that, and just try to give those big feeders the big bump. And then I obviously do a lot of rotation, so I look at where all my legumes have been, I look at where all my green manure has been, and I basically try to pair up all my plants with their fave situation.
Sure, that's cool. Well, Sadie Stellick, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for talking.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Sadie on Instagram, and make sure to check out Camp Glenbrook. They have a really cool video that kind of shows what their camp is about. They have a lot of good information on their website. I'm a little bit obsessed with it. I kind of want to go myself. Also, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on iTunes. My favorite review to date is one from somebody named Dilly Huns, and it is titled Intro and Closing Music Lost at a Star. It reads, great podcast, but gotta lose the intro song. It's terrible. It made me laugh, which I don't think was the goal, but I love my stupid theme song. So yeah, leave a review, and if I think it's funny or interesting or anywhere in between, maybe I'll read it on here. Please sign up for the Patreon page. That's Patreon, patreon.com/FarmerJesse. Also check out no-tillgrowers.com. We put up something relevant to no-till market gardening every single day. That isn't Saturday, and sometimes even then. And there's also a great forum there, so go check that out. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Elliot Smith, who helped us with the audio this week. Thank you for that, Elliot. We're trying to improve the audio, so that is another thing that will come with the Patreon page, so go check that out. Maybe we can afford some better equipment and to actually pay people like Elliot for helping us. So, all right, you all. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
At this point, I have more people than I'm going to be able to get to now. But when I first started, back a few months ago, when I first started kind of dreaming about doing the podcast and doing, the website and stuff, I was kind of I don't think I'm going to be able to do a podcast. I'm going to have to call the same 3 people every week. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it turns out they're all just there. They're just farming, and so no one knows where they are.